This presentation is VITA Greeter training for Quinnipiac University students who are interested in volunteering as greeters at the university's VITA site for the upcoming tax season. The presentation will provide some background regarding what the VITA program is. It will go over your responsibilities as a greeter if you choose to volunteer. And finally, the presentation will go over the ethical responsibilities for all volunteers at the VITA site. If you'd like to volunteer, you have to pass an ethics certification exam. This presentation will give you all of the information you need in order to take that certification exam. It's only 10 questions, and the presentation will also walk you through where you can access the exam and take the online exam. First of all, I just want to thank you for your interest in the VITA program. VITA stands for Voluntary Income Tax Assistance. It's a program sponsored by the Internal Revenue Service. It brings volunteers together to prepare tax returns free of charge to low and middle income taxpayers. This is a very valuable service that we're providing, saving these taxpayers a lot of money, preparing their tax returns for free at the VITA location, instead of these taxpayers having to go to a paid tax preparer. So if you do choose to volunteer, you can feel good about the very valuable service that we're providing to the surrounding community, the community surrounding Quinnipiac and the residents of Hamden. I want to thank you for your interest in the VITA program. We're excited, and we'd love to have you volunteer as much as you'd like next semester at the VITA site. All of the information contained in this presentation was borrowed from this website at the bottom of this title slide, this linklearncertification.com. This is a site where you can get all of the training you need to become a VITA volunteer. So my presentation is based on information contained on this website. So start off, just give you some specific information about Quinnipiac's VITA site. Quinnipiac has had a VITA program for a number of years. This year we're really excited because for the first time we are partnering with the United Way. Quinnipiac has joined the United Way of Greater New Haven's VITA Coalition, and so far it's been a great partnership. We have a lot of students who are excited to volunteer, and the United Way has very valuable resources to help us improve our VITA site and hopefully allow us to reach more taxpayers for the upcoming tax season. So we're excited about this new partnership with the United Way. Our VITA site for the upcoming tax season will be located at the Keefe Community Center. That's here in Hamden. It's about 10 minutes away from campus. It's on Pine Street, which is right off of Dixwell Avenue. We'll start holding these VITA sessions beginning in early February. Once we're up and running, we'll hold 2 VITA sessions per week. We'll hold one session on Wednesday afternoons from noon until 3 o'clock, and we'll hold a second session on Thursday evenings from 5 o'clock until 8 o'clock. So realizing that you are listening to this because you're interested in being a volunteer, we'd love to have you as often as you'd like to be there. But those are the days and times that we'll be preparing tax returns at the Keefe Center. So next we'll talk about what your responsibilities are as a VITA greeter. And I think perhaps the most important bullet point I put at the bottom of this slide, prior tax preparation experience is not required. So don't worry if you've never filed a tax return before. Don't worry if you haven't taken a tax course. Your responsibility as a greeter is simply to welcome people as they come to the Keefe Center and to give the taxpayers information regarding what they should expect while they're at the VITA site. At no time will you be expected, or should you try to give any tax advice. You'll leave that to the certified tax preparers who have taken a tax course and are ready to actually prepare tax returns. So if you choose to volunteer, you'll have 3 primary responsibilities. Your first responsibility will be simply welcoming the taxpayers to the Keefe Community Center. We want to create a very friendly and welcoming environment. We want to make sure people know that they're at the right spot, and that would be your job as a greeter. Your second responsibility as a greeter is to explain the expectations of the VITA program to the taxpayers that come to the site. So there's really three things we expect from taxpayers when they arrive at the VITA location. The first thing that they're expected to do is to complete what's called an intake form, or Form 13614-C. Okay, and so I wanted to show you what this form looked like, just to give you some background. So this is the first page of this form, and it's actually a 4-page form, and it asks the taxpayer just a number of questions that is going to help the tax preparer actually prepare the tax return. So this is what this tax form looks like. And don't worry if you're looking at it and you don't know what some of these questions mean or what they're asking, because again, your responsibility is simply to give this form to the taxpayer and ask them to fill it out. If a taxpayer were to come to you with a question regarding the form, you would simply instruct the taxpayer to mark unsure. So a lot of these questions, they can either answer yes, no, or unsure. So if they have a question, then you would instruct them to mark unsure, or you would instruct them to wait and ask that question to the certified tax preparer. So you shouldn't be trying to give advice about something that you're not prepared to do. So that's what the intake form looks like. And again, your responsibility is simply to give this intake form to the taxpayers when they arrive at the VITA site. The second expectation that you need to communicate to the taxpayers is that after they've filled out this intake form, their job isn't done. When they're finished, then they'll move on and meet with the tax return preparer. The preparers will also be Quinnipiac students, but they'll be students who have completed the tax course and students who have passed the certification exam, allowing them to prepare tax returns. So you need to tell the client that as soon as they finish the intake form, they'll meet with the preparer, and as they meet with the preparer, they'll be asked to answer a number of other questions or follow-up questions generated from that intake form. So they just need to be prepared for that. They can't, their job isn't over with the intake form. They have to sit down with the preparer as the return is being prepared. And then finally, after the return has been prepared, that return will also be reviewed by a second set of eyes. So every return we prepare at the VITA site will be prepared by one person and reviewed by someone else to try to catch any, to make sure that we catch any mistakes before we finalize the return. And the taxpayer also has to participate in this review process. They need to sit there with the reviewer and answer any of the reviewer's questions in order to finalize the return. So those are the three expectations for the VITA clients when they come to the site, and your job would be simply to give the intake form and to communicate these expectations to the taxpayers. Your final responsibility as a VITA greeter will be making sure that the clients have all of the documentation they need in order for us to prepare their return. So what kind of information do they need? They need a photo identification. They need social security numbers for themselves and for anyone that they're claiming on their return. Typically it's children, but anybody that's going to be reported on their tax return, they need to have the social security number information for those individuals. And finally, clients need to have all of their relevant tax forms. So oftentimes when taxpayers, when they're employed or if they have a bank account and they've earned income, they receive tax forms in January providing them the information that they need to report on their tax return. And we need those forms in order to prepare their tax return at the VITA site. So when the clients arrive at the Keefe Center, we want them to know as quickly as possible that we need these tax forms that they've received in the mail in order to prepare the return. If they don't have all of this documentation, if they don't have a photo ID, if they don't have all of the social security numbers they need, and if they don't have all of their relevant tax forms, we need to let them know quickly that we need that information so that they can go home and get the information, or they can come back to the site at a different time once they have everything that we need. Okay, and that would be another one of your responsibilities. So in summary, as a greeter, your responsibility is to welcome people to the Keefe Center, to briefly explain the expectations for the VITA process, for the VITA program, and finally to make sure that the taxpayers have all of the documentation that we need in order to prepare the return. So those are your three jobs as a greeter. So now let's talk about ethics, because every volunteer at the VITA location has to complete ethics training, which is this presentation, and also to pass an ethics certification exam. The certification exam is a 10-question exam, and you need to receive an 80% at least in order to pass the exam and volunteer at the VITA site. And at the end of the presentation, I will show you the website you need to go or the website you need to visit in order to take the exam, so that you're ready to do that when you've completed this presentation. So we should start off and talk about what is unethical behavior. So primarily we want to make sure we can distinguish unethical behavior from mistakes. So unethical behavior is willfully knowing that you are violating the tax law. So you know what you're doing is wrong as you're doing it, and that would be unethical behavior. If you simply make a mistake, a math error, or you have lack of knowledge in the area, that's not unethical behavior because you're not knowingly violating the tax law. So that's how we're going to distinguish unethical behavior from other types of behavior. It's that the person engaging in the behavior knows what they're doing is wrong and incorrect. And that's what obviously we want to avoid at the VITA site. So all VITA volunteers must agree to follow 6 standards of conduct. And this slide, provides those 6 standards of conduct. And we're going to kind of go over this one quickly because I have follow-up slides for each one of these standards. But there are 6 of them, and we must adhere to these at the VITA location. So the first standard of conduct is quality site requirements. And so there's actually 10 of these quality site requirements. And this is just what we need to do at our VITA site to make sure that we are operating within the standards of the Internal Revenue Service and the VITA program. So the first site requirement is certification. So this requirement mandates that all VITA volunteers have had appropriate training and have passed appropriate certification exams in order to volunteer at the VITA site. So as a greeter, your only responsibility is to complete the ethics training, which we're doing now, and to pass the ethics exam. Once you've done that, you now have the appropriate certification to volunteer at the VITA site. Tax return preparers also have to complete the ethics exam and pass the ethics certification exam. But preparers have to pass additional exams demonstrating their knowledge of tax return preparation. So there's a variety of exams that preparers can take and pass in order to volunteer at the VITA site. So there's a basic exam for easier tax returns. There's an advanced certification for more difficult returns. There's separate certification to prepare returns for individuals who are in the military, a separate certification exam for preparing tax returns for foreign students. And so for preparers, it's a little bit more complicated because there are a number of exams, and preparers can only prepare tax returns for that coincide with the certification that they have. Okay, so this is this first bullet point. Tax return preparers can only prepare returns for which they have certification. I already said that all of the tax returns are also reviewed by a second individual. This reviewer must also have proper certification. So the last bullet point is an example. So if someone comes in, a taxpayer comes in, and it's deemed that their tax return is advanced. It's a more difficult than a basic tax return. So we're going to categorize their tax return as an advanced tax return. What this site requirement mandates is that if it's an advanced return, the only preparers that can prepare that return are preparers who have taken and passed the advanced certification exam. So if you've only taken the basic exam, then you should not be preparing the tax return if it's an advanced return. And similarly for the review process, a reviewer has to have the appropriate certification. So if it's an advanced return, then the reviewer must have also passed advanced training or the advanced certification test in order to review that return. So this is the first site requirement for certification. For greeters, you're only responsible for ethics and taking the ethics exam, but looking at preparers, it's very important that we're only preparing returns that we're certified to prepare and that the reviewers also have the appropriate certification. So that's the first requirement. The second site requirement is the intake and interview process. And so we've already talked about that. So one of your responsibilities when taxpayers come to the site is to give them this intake form. It's important that we do this for every single taxpayer that comes to the VITA location. Everybody has to prepare and complete this intake form. And the interview process is also mandatory at the VITA site. So once the taxpayer has finished the intake form, then they'll go and sit down with the tax return preparer. The tax return preparer must complete the interview. They must ask questions and follow-up questions to the intake sheet in order to prepare the return. And it's important that we do that for each and every client that comes to the site. Maybe we're really busy one night. Even if we're really busy, we have to follow the protocol as outlined by the IRS. Okay, the intake and the interview process must happen regardless of how busy we are or other things that are going on. It's very important that we adhere to this process. Okay, so that's the intake and review requirement. The next requirement is the quality review process. And again, every return that's prepared has to be reviewed by someone else that has the appropriate certification. Another thing that we need to do during the quality review process is that the reviewer must communicate to the taxpayer that it is the responsibility of the taxpayer for the information that's reported on the tax return. So the preparers are going to prepare the tax return based on the information provided by the taxpayer. So the taxpayer needs to understand that they're responsible for this information. And they need to be honest about the information that they're giving us because ultimately it's their responsibility. So that's the quality review process and our requirements at the VITA location for that process. Okay, so we'll go through the rest of the quality site requirements rather quickly because many of them don't necessarily apply to you as a VITA greeter. So we'll quickly go through them. So the fourth quality site requirement involves reference materials, and this is really the job of the faculty member who's going to be at the VITA location. It's our responsibility to make sure that the site has adequate reference materials so that tax preparers, if they have a question, they have IRS materials that they can go and look at to make sure that they're preparing the tax returns correctly. So that's another quality site requirement, is to make sure we have these materials available at the VITA location. The fifth quality site requirement is that everyone that's volunteering at the site has to sign and date Form 13615, the Volunteer Standards of Conduct Agreement. And so this agreement is simply, your contract saying that you are going to follow these standards of conduct that we're discussing right now. So everyone needs to sign this agreement. You can sign the agreement electronically, and I'll show you how to do that at the end of the presentation. The sixth quality site requirement is timely filing. This requirement just mandates that the tax returns are filed in a timely manner. So if the tax preparer comes to we're e-filing all of our returns, so I should kind of say that up front. When taxpayers come to the site, we're going to prepare their returns in tax software, and we're going to e-file the returns rather than send a paper return into the IRS. And so the sixth requirement just mandates that we file the returns in a timely manner after they've been prepared. Okay, so the preparer can prepare the return, the reviewer then reviews the return, and then as quickly as possible we need to submit those returns to the Internal Revenue Service. The seventh quality site requirement is a requirement to respect everyone's civil rights that come to the VITA location, meaning that, hopefully this goes without saying, but we need to treat everyone the same, no discrimination. We just need to treat everyone equally and respectfully as they come to the VITA site. So that's our seventh requirement. The eighth and ninth requirements for our quality site is our identifying numbers. And again, this is more of a concern for the tax return preparers and the reviewers, so not something that greeters really need to worry about. But our site will have a specific identification number that needs to show up on all of the returns that we're preparing. And we'll also have electronic filing ID numbers that need to show up on the returns as well. But you guys won't be preparing returns, so you don't need to really worry about the identification numbers. But we need to make sure we have those in order to adhere to the standards of conduct. And then the last quality site requirement is to make sure that we're protecting the privacy of the clients who are coming to the VITA location. And again, hopefully this goes without saying, but anything that you might see or hear at the VITA site, all of this information has to be completely confidential. The people that are coming to the site, we have a lot of personal information about these individuals, their names, their addresses, their social security numbers, and we need to be very careful with this information to make sure that there's no opportunity to abuse this information that we have at the VITA site. So anything that you see or hear at the VITA site, we have to keep that information private and secure, and you shouldn't be repeating anything you see or hear at the VITA location. So again, hopefully that would go without saying, but that's one of the quality site requirements, is to make sure that we're very careful with the information that we have. So that's the first standard of conduct, okay, these 10 quality site requirements. And again, the ones that are probably most applicable to you as a greeter would be this one, certification, knowing what certification you need and knowing the rules for the preparers, and knowing how the intake and interview processes work and the quality review process. It's important that you know generally how these processes work, because it's your responsibility to communicate these expectations to the taxpayers. Okay. So moving on with the standards of conduct, remember there's 6, and we've talked about 1. The second standard of conduct is that we cannot accept any payment or solicit donations for the tax returns that we prepare. So it's very inappropriate to have a tip jar. If someone tries to pay you for the services that we've provided at the VITA location, we have to very graciously deny that payment. We cannot accept any payment from taxpayers, even if they'd like to pay us for the services that we've provided. If we have someone come in and they're very adamant that they'd like to make a payment, we should suggest that they instead make a donation to the United Way, and that would be an appropriate way for them to show their appreciation for the VITA program. Okay, so under no circumstances can we accept payment. This is a free service. The second bullet point under here is, and it might seem obvious, but I'll maybe explain why we have to say it. So tax returns can only be deposited into an account bearing the taxpayer's name. So a lot of the taxpayers that are going to come to the VITA location, a lot of them are probably going to get refunds. A lot of them will probably be eligible for tax credits that are going to generate refunds. So they're going to get money back when they file their tax return. The quickest way to get your money back when you file a tax return, if you're owed a refund, is to have that refund directly deposited into your bank account. So there's a place on the tax return where you can tell the IRS information about your bank account, so that once they've processed your return, they can very quickly make a payment directly into your account. Typically, if you're direct deposit, it might take 2 weeks to get your refund. If instead you don't have a bank account in order to facilitate the direct deposit, it could take 4 to 6 weeks to get your refund. So it's much quicker if you direct deposit it into an account. If a client wants to direct deposit their refund into an account, the account has to be their account. Refunds can't be deposited into a VITA volunteer's personal bank account. So 2 things. Of course, we can't take payments, so it would be very inappropriate for us to put our bank account information and for the volunteers to receive the taxpayer's income tax refund. Okay. But also, you might have a taxpayer that comes in and they might really need their refund, and they might need it quickly, and not everyone has a bank account. And so what if we have a taxpayer that comes to the site and says, well, what if we just direct deposit it into your account, because we can get it faster that way, and then once the money hits your bank account, then you can write me a check, or you can give me the amount of my refund in cash. And we might we might want to help the taxpayer, right? We might want to help them get their refund quicker, but it's totally inappropriate for us to agree to do something like that. So under no circumstances could we put the direct deposit into one of our bank accounts, even if we're planning to turn around and give the money to the taxpayer once we receive the deposit. Okay, so totally inappropriate, and we obviously wouldn't want to do that at the VITA location. So that's the second standard of conduct. We can accept payment. The third standard of conduct is that we can't solicit business from any of the taxpayers that come to the VITA site. Now, I don't think this is going to be a big problem for students. This would be more of an issue if you had professionals who were volunteering with the VITA program. And so if you were running a business, kind of a side business, and someone came to the VITA location, it would be very inappropriate for you to, after you've prepared their tax return, try to use the information that you've learned from the taxpayer as you're preparing their return to try to convince that person to become a client of yours in whatever business you're involved in. Again, with students, I don't think we have to worry about this, but we should be aware that this is the standard of conduct. We can't use any information about the taxpayers in order to solicit business from them. The fourth standard of conduct is that we cannot knowingly prepare false returns. Again, hopefully this goes without saying. We have to prepare the returns correctly and based on the appropriate tax law. And again, this is less of a concern for greeters because you guys won't be preparing tax returns, but you should know that this is one of the standards of conduct. If a taxpayer comes in and they're a low-income taxpayer, you might want to help them out, but it's not helping them out by omitting income from their return or doing something knowingly wrong on their tax return. It's not helping them out because there's always a potential that the taxpayer would get audited, and that's just going to create a huge mess for the taxpayer in the end. So no matter what happens, even if the taxpayer ends up owing money and it might be difficult for the taxpayer to make their tax payment, we have to prepare the tax returns correctly in accordance with the tax law. So that's the fourth standard of conduct. So let's kind of link this back to our definition of unethical behavior. So each return at the VITA site is going to be prepared by one person and reviewed by a second person. So let's say that the preparer of the tax return wants to help the taxpayer out. It's a low-income taxpayer, and the taxpayer they end up owing money to the IRS, and the preparer feels really bad, and they want to help the taxpayer, and so the tax preparer decides to leave off some of the income or to create a fictitious deduction that would decrease the taxpayer's taxable income. So the preparer does something on the return in order to help the taxpayer, but knowing they're breaking the tax law, they're doing it incorrectly. And then the reviewer gets that return, and the reviewer doesn't know what the preparer did, and the reviewer doesn't catch the mistake, and they submit the tax return. The reviewer says it's fine, and then they e-file the return with the Internal Revenue Service. Under that scenario, it would only be the tax preparer that has acted unethically and violated the standard of conduct, because only the preparer knowingly did something wrong. The reviewer simply missed it, and so their behavior would not be unethical behavior. Only the preparer's return would be unethical. So this goes along with preparing false returns. Okay, hopefully this isn't a problem. I don't expect it to be a problem, but we need to know that that's one of the standards of conduct. The fifth standard of conduct is we cannot engage in criminal, infamous, dishonest, or notoriously disgraceful conduct. Again, hopefully this isn't a problem. At the VITA site, we just need to be very respectful to the people that come to get their tax returns prepared. We need to act ethically and within the tax law. This is obviously what I would expect from Quinnipiac students, and I just can't imagine that this would ever be a problem. But again, it's one of the standards of conduct, so we need to point out that it is one. But I don't expect that this would be an issue. And then finally, the sixth standard of conduct is that we have to treat all taxpayers in a professional and courteous and respectful manner. And this is part of your job as a greeter when they come in, is just to be pleasant. So it could be that our VITA location is very busy, and if our VITA location is very busy, then we might have taxpayers who have to wait for an extended period of time before they can get their tax return prepared. this wait might make taxpayers a little grumpy because they've already worked all day and they're tired, they just want to get home. Regardless of how grumpy the taxpayers might get because they're waiting in order to get their tax return prepared, we cannot be grumpy back. Okay, we have to be respectful and friendly and courteous at all times. Okay, as a greeter, you might have to turn a taxpayer away because they don't have all of the information that they need in order to prepare the tax return. Hopefully the taxpayer understands this, but if they're, a little frustrated that they have to go home and get the information and come back, and they let you know that they're frustrated, again, you cannot return their frustration with additional frustration. We always have to be friendly and kind and respectful at the VITA site, and that's the last standard of conduct. Okay, that's how we should act at the VITA site. Those are our responsibilities. So let's talk about ethical violations. And again, hopefully we don't have to worry about this. Quinnipiac students are great students, and I wouldn't expect that we'd have any problems, but we should talk about what happens if we do have a problem, if there is an ethical violation at the VITA site. What are the consequences? So the first consequence is that volunteer would be removed from the VITA program. Obviously, they wouldn't be able to volunteer anymore. Potentially, there could be a criminal investigation. So if you're knowingly doing things wrong at the VITA site, you're knowingly breaking the tax law, then that potentially opens up some liability to you, the tax preparer. But again, as a greeter, this isn't something that you would need to worry about because you're not actually preparing the tax returns. But there is some potential liability that falls on the back of the preparer if they're doing something that they know is wrong. Okay, again, shouldn't be a problem. Other things that could happen if there are ethical violations, the IRS might terminate its relationship with Quinnipiac, meaning that Quinnipiac could no longer have a VITA location. It could terminate its relationship with United Way, which would be horrible. We would hate for that to happen. We'll make sure that that doesn't happen. But these are the things that could happen if we're acting unethically. The IRS could kind of bar our organizations from having a VITA site in the future. The IRS could discontinue its support. The IRS could take away grant money, so the United Way gets grant money to help them fund these VITA sites, and the IRS could take that money away if there's ethical violations with its partner organizations. So all of these bad things could happen, which is why we need to make sure we're acting ethically. As a greeter, if you notice anything that seems unethical, you could always come and talk to the site coordinator or a Quinnipiac faculty member, and we would keep your, it could be anonymous. But if you see something that seems like it's unethical, you should say something to the faculty member that's there so the situation can be addressed. So that's violations. Again, hopefully not something we need to worry about, but this is what we need to know if something were to happen. These are the consequences. Okay, and then finally, we need to quickly talk about the Volunteer Protection Act. So in the last slide, I said if there's an ethical violation, there could be a potential criminal investigation into the volunteer. The Volunteer Protection Act actually protects volunteers, but it only protects volunteers as long as they're acting within the scope of VITA. So the Volunteer Protection Act is going to protect Quinnipiac students who are preparing tax returns. Even if we make mistakes, this Volunteer Protection Act is going to protect us from any liability as long as we're following the standards of conduct, as long as we're preparing returns that are within the scope of VITA, everyone has a proper certification. If we're running the site as we should, and the Quinnipiac faculty will make sure that we're running it as we should be running it, then if we make mistakes, we're going to be protected under this Volunteer Protection Act. Okay, so again, this might be more of a concern for preparers rather than greeters, but it's important to point this out, that there is some protection as long as what we're doing is in adherence to the protocol of the VITA program. Okay, so this is the end of my presentation. That's all the information that you need to know in order to complete the ethics exam, everything you need to know about your ethical responsibilities at the VITA site. So very briefly, I just want to let you know where you go to take the VITA certification exam. So I hope you're still with me, and I hope you're excited to volunteer. I hope you have a better understanding of what you'll do if you show up as a volunteer. And if you're still with me and you're excited, then this is what you need to do in order to be prepared to help us out next semester or in the spring semester. So you need to go to this website, this linklearncertification.com, and once you're here, this is where you need to go in order to take the online certification test. So you'll need to create a new account because you've likely never volunteered with the IRS before. So you would select to create a new account. So once you're here to create a new account, it's going to ask you for some information. None of it's, personal information. You don't have to give your social security number or anything to the IRS. It's just asking for your name and your address. And you'll have to provide this information in order to take the certification exam. So a couple things you need to know when you're here. When you go to select the group, your group should be VITA Volunteer. So that's the program that you're volunteering is with the VITA program, so that should be your group. For a site coordinator, your answer should be no, because you're not going to be serving as a site coordinator. You're going to be volunteering as a site greeter, so answer no to that question. For your training source, you can actually select other because your training source has been this presentation, so you can select other for that. And then going through the rest of this, the IRS is just asking for your name, this SEID, you can leave that blank because over here it says it's only for IRS employees, and I doubt that you are an IRS employee, so you would leave that blank. You have to create a logon ID and a password. Again, you're creating these and you're providing the IRS with your email address, your physical address. This can either be your Quinnipiac address or your home address. Either one, you just have to give an address to the IRS. And then down here, your time zone, the number of years that you have volunteered, probably 0 for most of you. Don't select anything here for continuing education credit, or you can select not applicable actually, so select NA for that one. And then PTIN number, you don't have one of those, so you would leave that blank as well. So I've already registered and taken the exam, so I'm not actually going to register, but this is what you need to do in order to register. Okay, so just kind of pointing out some of these that you might not have known before this presentation. So VITA Volunteer, no to site coordinator, other to training source, down here NA for continuing education, and be sure to leave that PTIN number blank because you don't need it. So once you've provided all that information, you will hit register. Okay, and once you hit register, you're going to end up here. And this is where all of the exams are going to be located, the exams that you would like to take. So you are only going to take the Standards of Conduct exam. So when you open this up, this will be an option, the ethics exam or the conduct exam. Basic exam and this health savings account exam will also be options for you, but again, you do not take those exams. So only one you have to take is the ethics exam or the Standards of Conduct exam. So when you're here, you'll click on it. I've already taken it, so I can't launch it again, but there'll be a launch button up here that you'll click on, and that will allow you access to the ethics exam. It's 10 questions. It should really only take you about 5 minutes. And hopefully after listening to this presentation, you easily pass the exam. Once you pass the exam, you can go to print your certificate. And when you go to print it, really what you should do is create a PDF version of the certificate, and you can email the PDF version of the certificate to Paige Cantwell of the Accounting Society. I bet you all know her, but you can email your certificate to her, and she will get it to the appropriate person so that you're ready to volunteer at the VITA location. And then one final thing, after you've taken and passed the ethics exam, you've sent the PDF version to Paige so that we have record of it. You can sign that volunteer agreement. We kind of talked about it. Everyone that's volunteering has to agree that they're going to abide by the Standards of Conduct. You can electronically do this, electronically sign this form by simply checking that box. So you'll want to make sure that you check that box after you've taken the exam. Once you've done all of these things, you're set and you're ready to volunteer at the VITA site for the tax season. Again, we're really happy that you're interested in helping us out, and we hope to see you often at the VITA site next semester. If you have any questions, you can go ahead and reach out to Paige or any of the past e-board or current e-board of the Accounting Society, or you can contact Darcy Costello, Professor Costello. My contact information is on Quinnipiac's website. I should have put it on here, but you can find me. But you can contact me, Professor Costello, and I'm happy to answer any questions, address any concerns you might have about the VITA program. But again, I'm excited that you're interested in helping, and I hope to see you next semester. And that's all I have. Thanks a lot.